Hey, what is up? This is NinjaGeek and welcome back to episode 2, where today we're going to learn to play Forbidden Stars by Fantasy Flight Games. This is one of my favourite games and quite popular amongst my gaming group. It's for 2 to 4 players, where each player will take on the role of one faction, whether it be the Space Marines in their power armour, the treacherous Chaos Space Marines, the mysterious Eldar, or the savage greenskin Orcs. During the game, players are going to build structures, upgrade their factions, move across the board to conquer worlds, and gain objectives to win the game. Sadly, this game is now out of print, but it still gets a lot of love in the community. So today I thought we'd learn the rules and show you what it's about. So let's get started. Okay, I've set up partially for a 2-player game. And first thing you need to do is select a faction map for each player. So we have the Space Marines and the Chaos. And the next thing is to select all the starting components for each of those factions. I've already done this for the Chaos Space Marine, so it shows the tokens, material dial, and their starting units on the board. For the Space Marines, their starting units are highlighted on the back of the faction map. And before placing your units, you need to set up the game board. The game board is set up using a number of individual tiles, and there is an introductory setup in the rules of how to do this. For the first time you play, or for a more balanced game, the rulebook does show you how to set up each individual tile and where the starting units go, and this includes objective tokens and the warp storms as well, so that's what I've done here. For the objective tokens, there are a number of objective tokens per faction equal to the number of players in the game. So we're playing a 2-player game, so each faction will have 2 objective tokens on the board. The next thing you need to do is grab your tokens. So we have structure control tokens, 8 order tokens, and a material dial set to 6 as indicated on the back of the mat. For the decks, there are 10 combat cards, and these have the icon of the faction in the top left corner. These are paired, so there are 5 pairs, so they need to be shuffled and placed face down. You also have a deck of event cards for each faction. These are nasty tactics and schemes that are used during the game, shuffled and placed face down. The upgrade cards, there are 2 decks. There is a combat card upgrade deck, and these are paired as well. So when you buy one, you actually buy the second card as well. So leave these face up. And there are order upgrade cards, 5 of, which can be placed face up. And these make your order tokens more badass as the game goes on. We have the round token set on one of the round track, an area for the die, and some areas for the tokens here, which are the reinforcement, combat, forge, and material tokens as well. That's the initial setup. The idea of the game is for the factions to upgrade their cards, build units, move about the board, starting battles. But ideally you want to collect your objectives, and when you've collected all your objectives, the game ends. So that is the setup, and now we're going to go into a detailed view of the individual tiles. So here is just an example of a single game tile that's used to make up the board during the setup. Each one of these individual tiles is known as a system tile and contains the following features: 1 or more world areas, 1 or more void areas. In the centre here is an order token box, and there are also areas for placing objective tokens during the setup. The banners underneath the worlds hold a variety of icons, but the green cog here is known as a material value. The red icon here is known as an asset, and these skulls that are depicted here, these are known as the world's unit capacity. So here, just a quick example of a faction map. Each faction map will show some artwork, as well as that faction's special ability that can be used during the game, and has an area to place the collected objectives. Down the side here is icons of the structures and the units that can be paid for during the game, with their material cost in green, and those that require forge tokens here at the bottom. These yellow icons here are the unit's command level cost, and down the side here, this area is used for combat, where you have the combat value, the wounds or health of that unit, and the morale. So during the planning phase, players take turns, starting with the first player placing one order token face down on the game board in the order token box. This goes clockwise until all players have placed 4 order tokens. If there is an order token already in a system tile where you wish to place yours, you just place it on top, whether it's previously your order token or another faction's. Order tokens can only be placed in system tiles that you have a unit in, or system tiles that are adjacent to tiles that you have units in. So when placing these order tokens, Chaos can place in there because they have units in this system. Likewise, Space Marines can place order tokens here because they have units in this system. The Chaos can also place here because they are adjacent to this system tile. And adjacent means that they share a border here, not diagonally. So the Chaos could not place one here because it's diagonally adjacent. The Space Marines can place their second order token on top of the Chaos token because that system tile is adjacent to one they have a unit in. And lastly, the Chaos can place one here because they are adjacent to this unit, even though it has the Space Marine units in. So the order tokens that were placed in the planning phase are the main actions that allow players to move, build and attack. There are 4 different types of token, and each faction has access to 2 of each of those type, but they can only place 4 down during the planning phase. The order tokens are, here is deploy, where players can spend material to purchase new units and structures. Strategize, where players can purchase upgrade and combat cards, and also allows them to draw an event card at the end of the round. Dominate, the players gain the assets from each of the friendly worlds in the system that they control. They may also use the special ability on their faction sheet. And lastly, there is advance, where players can move the unit into different systems and start combat. So here we'll assume it's the Space Marines' turn and they wish to resolve their deploy order. For this, they can place units and build structures, but if they do so, they must place their units first. Units must have a factory in the active system, and units can be placed on any world or void area that is controlled or uncontrolled. They couldn't place any units here because the Chaos Marines control that void. You must spend material equal to the unit by reducing your material dial, and you can use cash tokens to reduce the cost of a single unit by 2. Some units cost a forge token, so a forge token must be spent in addition to the material cost. The number in yellow here is the command level cost, and that is equivalent to the number of cities that player controls anywhere on the game board. So if they wish to build Space Marines, they must have at least 1 city that they control somewhere on the board. A forge token can be used to reduce this cost by 1. When placing ground units, they must be placed on worlds, and when placing ship units, they must be placed in voids. The only other thing to take into consideration is the world capacity unit, which is located with these skulls on the banner where the factory is located. So here it is 3, meaning they can only build 3 units. If there was a factory on this world as well, you can actually add these together, so you could build 5 units. Once you are deciding to build, you can place your units and then move on to building structures. The cost of the structures are here, and you must place only 1 structure on any friendly world on the active system that does not have a structure already placed. So if they wish to build another factory, they can place a control token with the factory on top showing that the Space Marines now control that factory. Cash tokens likewise can be used to reduce the cost of these structures. There are 3 structures in the game. Factories are needed to buy units, cities increase the command level for buying units and upgrade cards, and bastions act as a unit for combat and prevent orbital strikes. So if playing a dominate order, the faction playing that order is able to do 2 things. Firstly, the player can gain assets granted by each friendly world in the active system. So for instance, the Chaos Space Marines, they play dominate order here. They're able to gain the asset which is displayed in the right corner of the world banner here in red. Likewise, Space Marines, they also choose dominate order. They're able to gain both the assets in this world that they control, and had there been any assets here, they would have been able to take those as well. There are 4 different types of assets in the game. Forge tokens, cash tokens, and reinforcement tokens can all be taken from the supply. For prosperity assets, the faction playing that is able to choose which asset they take from the supply. The second thing they're able to do is the ability located on their faction mat. And in the case of Chaos Space Marines, they're able to take a cultist from a friendly world in the active system and place it on a friendly or uncontrolled world in an adjacent system. So they could take a cultist here and place it on any 3 of these worlds, or even over here because they're all adjacent. Likewise, the Space Marines would also be able to use their special ability too. When playing a strategize order, first make sure you have a unit or structure in the active system. Then you can do a few things. You can buy an order upgrade card or a combat upgrade card. To do so, you need to meet the prerequisites for the command level and spend material from your material dial. You cannot use cash tokens or forge tokens for these purchases. For an order token upgrade card, take the card you wish to buy, and that becomes active for the rest of the game and gives you benefits when playing that order. For the combat upgrade cards, you pay 1 cost, but take both copies of the card. You then search your combat deck, remove a pair of cards, and replace them with the newly purchased cards. The last thing you do, take your order token, put it onto your event deck as a reminder to draw a card later in the game. When playing an advanced order as shown here by the Chaos Space Marines, players can move units into the active area and begin combat. The first thing is the active player may move ships in the active system and 1 adjacent system to any voids in the active system. Well, there are no ships in the active system, so we'll decide to move 1 from the adjacent system to here. Second thing they can do is move ground units, and again the player may move ground units in the active system and 1 adjacent system to any worlds in the active system. As I moved ships from this system, I have to move my ground units from this adjacent system. I couldn't choose another adjacent system. And when moving units, I must make sure that there's a series of contiguous non-diagonal friendly areas. So he couldn't move across here because this is not a friendly area, it's uncontrolled. However, you can use worlds and voids. So the Chaos Space Marines could move 1 unit to here. Lastly, because there's now a contested area, a battle will take place. It's also important to note that after the order has been resolved, players need to abide by the world capacity unit icons here, which means that no more than 2 units can be in any one area, and no more than 3 ships can be in any one void after the order is resolved. Using the same example, we'll assume that the Chaos player did not move their ground units during the movement phase. Because there are no battles and no contested areas, an orbital strike can now take place. So the Chaos player will choose an enemy world in the active system and 1 void in that system that contains friendly units here. Evaluate the combat value, which is 4 die, and roll them, and we'll assume we've rolled 4 hits, and then look at the wounds or the health value of the Space Marine Scouts, which is 2. So we've done 3 hits. 2 wounds will be used to eliminate that Space Marine Scout, and the remaining 1 would be wasted because you cannot rout from an orbital strike. Also, if this world had a Bastion, you cannot do orbital strikes against worlds with the Bastions in. If there is a contested area in the advanced phase, as shown here, battle will take place. And battle will commence until all enemy units are destroyed, including Bastions, or after 3 rounds of combat, the faction with the most morale. The first stage is preparation, where both players take die equal to the total attack value of all unrouted units and Bastions. And once rolled, you organise these into groups. You can have a maximum of 8 die for any one roll. So for here, we have Chaos Space Marine that rolls 3 die. And here we have Space Marine Scouts that roll 1 die each. So 2 die here, and 3 die there. In the second phase, Execution, each player randomly draws 5 cards from their combat deck and selects 1. They place them face down, and the attacker reveals first. The defender then reveals their cards. The attacker will reveal and resolve their card first, followed by the defender. The text is followed from top to bottom and can gain you extra die, combat tokens, changing the side of a die, and some of the abilities you must have a particular unit in battle. So for instance here, to use this ability, the Chaos must have a Chaos Titan and Grand Cruiser, so they couldn't use this in this battle. The combat is unassessed by looking at the icons on the side of the card and the die for both factions. So for the Chaos Space Marines, they've scored 1, 2, 3 offensive hits and have 1 defense. Space Marine have scored 1, 2, 3 hits and 1 defense. For the Chaos Space Marines, these 3 hits against the Scouts with 2 health each would eliminate 1 Scout, and the remaining 1 damage would then be routed. However, Space Marines have a defense icon, so they remain safe. For the Space Marines, they have 1, 2, 3 hits. The Chaos Space Marines have 3 wounds, but they also have 1 defense. So that's 2 wounds in total. Therefore, the Chaos Space Marine is now routed. When taking damage, the player chooses their own units to take damage, but first must choose unrouted units unless there's no other option. As shown, if damage is lower than the health unit, then that unit is routed and cannot participate anymore in that combat. If damage is equal or greater, then the unit is destroyed, as we saw with the Space Marine Scout. Damage greater than a unit's health will be carried over to another unit, and Bastions can be destroyed this way as well, but Bastions can never be routed. As for this particular combat, as there is still standing unit and a routed unit, a second phase begins, where each player will again draw a card secretly and reveal it. And this will happen for a maximum of 3 times until either there are no units of one faction remaining, or the morale for one side is higher. And to count the morale, all standing units have a morale value here. So it's 2 for the Space Marine Scout, and they have a few here, so they have 4. The Chaos Space Marine cannot use their morale because they are routed, and they have 1, 2, 3, 4. So at the minute, they tie. In this case, the defender wins. As the attacker lost, he must retreat, following the same path they advanced in. So they'd move to here and remain routed. It's important to note that while a unit is routed during battle, they cannot add their morale and they cannot have any abilities that have their name used for that particular unit unless there's another standing unit in that battle. If the defender had lost and had to retreat, they'd have to move to an adjacent friendly or uncontrolled world in that area. After battle, any combat tokens, reinforcement tokens that were used are discarded back into the token pile. During the third and final phase of the round, the refresh phase, players collect objectives, collect material, rally routed units, draw event, and move warp storms. So to collect objectives, players will look to see if there are any objectives in worlds that they control, and if there are, they can take them, place them onto their player map. As mentioned, a player wins the game if they collect a number of objective tokens equal to the number of players in the game. Second thing they do is collect material. This is indicated by the green cog on worlds, and they collect this material if they control that world. So the Chaos Space Marines would collect 3, and so would the Space Marines. And this is indicated by increasing the number on their material dial. Any unit that was previously routed in battle can be unrouted. And the last thing players do is draw events and move warp storms. During the draw events, each player will draw events cards equal to the number of order tokens placed on the deck here. And these order tokens are placed on the deck if a revealed order token isn't played or a strategize order is played. Players then remove the order tokens back to their supply and draw 1 card for every order token on the deck. If a player drew more than 1 card, they're able to select which card they wish to play. After selecting the card, players reveal the cards and first look at this icon here to see where the warp stone moves. This icon means that the warp storm will flip one way or the other. So we'll use the top action and move here, and we turn the warp storm over to show it's been moved. Other cards move the warp storms in various other directions, so they can move directly up or down. Others slide them across. This can be quite a tactical part of the game because units cannot move through warp stones at all. Lastly, players can then resolve the bottom part of their tactic card or scheme. Scheme cards will remain face up next to the player's faction sheet, whereas the tactics can be shuffled back into the deck. It's important to note that if a player did not draw any event card, he must still move a warp storm. To do so, he just takes the top card of his deck and only uses the part with the warp storm movement and ignores the rest of the text. He then shuffles that card back into his deck without resolving the ability. If at any point during the refresh phase a player has all the required objectives, they win the game and the game ends. So there you have it. A couple of things to recap on. During the planning phase, although you have 8 order tokens to use, you can only place 4 of them. And when you do, you place 1 at a time in player order until every player has placed 4. When placing them, they must go into an order token box in a system tile that you have units in, or an adjacent system adjacent to one that you have units in. During the operations phase, this is the main meat of the game where you resolve the order tokens. You take turns in player order resolving the top order token from a stack. If you do not have an order token visible, then you'll have to wait till your next turn. The 4 orders that you can resolve are deploy, where you can place units and build structures. If doing both, you must build the units before placing your structures. For the units, you pay the cost, and they can go into any friendly or uncontrolled world in that active system, making sure you adhere to the world's unit capacity of where that factory is based. For structures, after paying the cost, they must go into a friendly world with no other structure in it. For the dominate order, you gain the assets, which is the red icon located on the right of the banners below the world for all friendly worlds that you control. If there are 2 icons, you get both assets. For here, you're also able to play your faction ability as well. The strategize order, 2 things happen here. Is firstly, you can buy upgrades for your combat deck and your order tokens. If doing the order tokens, that just remains face up next to your player mat, and it just gives you a benefit when playing that particular order. For the combat cards, you pay 1 cost, but you're actually buying a pair of cards, and you take those cards and you replace them with a pair of cards in your combat deck. With this ability, you're also able to take your token and place it onto your event deck, reminding you that you can draw at least 1 card during the refresh phase. So the advanced order token, this is the most complex in the game and allows you to move units within that active tile or an adjacent tile and start any battles in contested areas. Firstly, you need to move ships, and ships can move from void to any void in the active area and can come from an adjacent tile. When moving ground units, they must move from an adjacent planet to an adjacent planet. However, if there's a link of friendly adjacent planets, they can planet hop across the board, and they can also use voids to do this if they're friendly ships in those voids as well. If there's no contested area after movement, the player who played the advanced order token can actually do an orbital strike in that active area. To do so, they need to have a ship in a void in that active area adjacent to an enemy planet. They then collect dice equal to the combat value of all the ships in that void, roll them, and any hits are assigned to the enemy units in that world. If the damage or the offensive icons rolled equals or exceeds the health value of the units, they're eliminated. If not, nothing happens. You do not rout units from an orbital strike. If there's a bastion in that world, you cannot complete an orbital strike. If there is a contested area, you won't do this. Instead, you'll do a battle. And to do a battle, there is a number of steps. First, there's a preparation phase. And what each player does then is collect a number of dice equal to the combat value of all unrouted units in that world or void. They roll the die and separate the die into the icons of offensive, defensive, and morale icons. Once that's done, they will each draw 5 cards from their combat deck, and during the execution phase, the attacker will play 1 card and resolve it, followed by the defender. And to resolve the card, you read the text from top to bottom, doing the general ability first, followed by the unit ability. And you can only do the unit ability if that unit is taking part in that battle and not routed. Any tokens, extra die, and the icons on the side of the cards are then used to assess damage, where you add up your offensive icons, you then compare it to the enemy's defensive icons. If it outweighs it, the remaining damage is then assigned to the unit, and vice versa for the defender. When assigning damage to units, you can choose your own units to take the damage, rather than having the other player choose your units. And when you do so, they must be unrouted. Any damage that exceeds or equals, you remove that unit from the board and then continue until all the damage has been spent. If damage doesn't equal a unit's health, that unit is just tipped over and routed, and both players do this at the same time. If there are no enemy forces in play, then you win that battle. However, if there are remaining forces, you then do this another 2 times, playing a card each, one at a time, resolving the abilities, and all the tokens, the die, the icons on the side of all the cards in play will remain there throughout the whole battle. At the end of the battle, if there's still units remaining on the board from both sides, then you have to add up the morale. And to do this, you look at the faction sheet of all standing units in play to count how much morale they're worth. You add the tokens, die, and the side of the cards for morale value, and the player with the highest morale value wins. If there's a tie, the defender wins. Otherwise, it's whoever has the most morale. The loser has to retreat. If it's the attacker, they retreat into at least one area, or into an area at least one of the units moves from during the advance. If it's the defender that has to retreat, they move all their units to a friendly area in that system tile or an adjacent system tile. However, here, if there's a choice between uncontrolled or friendly, they must go to friendly first. Any structures, cities and factories that are remaining in the contested area that don't belong to you and you've won the battle, you can actually take your control token, switch it for the other players, and you now control that unit or that structure. So if a player can't or doesn't wish to resolve their order token, similar to the strategize, they can take their order token off the board and place it onto their event deck as a reminder to draw that many cards at the end of or during the refresh phase. During the refresh phase, players here, they take turns. First of all is you collect objectives. Any objectives that are in your area or on a world that you control, where the faction symbol of that objective token matches your faction symbol, you can then claim that objective. You cannot claim objectives from other players, only your own factions. If you have a number of objective tokens in your objective token box that equals the number of players in the game stops here and you win. If not, move to the next phase, which is collect material. On each of the worlds there is a banner symbol with a green cog, and you gain that much material by altering your material dial. The next thing you do is you draw an event card for each order token that you have placed on there. If you've placed more than one, you draw that many cards. However, you only get to play one, so you have to choose one and discard the others. When you do this, you first of all move the warp storms, and these warp storms will be shown in the right hand corner, and they can shift up and down, left, right, or they can flip. When doing so, it's a good idea to turn the warp storms upside down so the grey side is showing as a reminder that that's been moved, because you cannot move one that has already been moved. Once all players have moved one warp storm, the next part begins. And so you have it, NinjaGeek's Learn to Play Forbidden Stars. One thing I did forget was that in the refresh phase, the very last step is to move the first player token clockwise to the next person, and they become the first player during the next round. So it can be quite a long game. I think here it says 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours, but if you're playing with 4 people, especially if any of them are quite new, it can take up to 4 hours to play at least, I think. It's not overly complex. I think the most complex part of the game is the advance order. There are so many moving parts there with the units, the troops, making sure you've got the unit capacity right at the end as well. You can have up to as many troops as you want, but 5 ships in a void, but then after the battle you have to then reassess for the unit capacity, and that can be forgotten sometimes. Also, that if you don't play an order token, you can put it on your event deck. That sometimes gets forgotten as well. But it's a very, very good strategic game. Reminds me a bit of Game of Thrones, where you've got your order tokens to place here. However, there's a little bit of randomness and chaos here with the obviously the rolling of the dice and then the movement of the warp stones, because it's been done before. You have the perfect strategy, you think you can move, you've placed your advanced tokens and things, and you've moved in. The next one, you're all cut off from the rest of your army, which can be really infuriating sometimes, to the expense of others that are laughing at you for it. Do enjoy this game. I hope that Learn to Play has made the rules slightly better for you. It's not particularly complex, as I said, but teaching new players can be quite difficult, so it's pretty good if they've got somewhere to start. Okay, this has been NinjaGeek Learn to Play. Thanks very much.